Ladies and handsome men, I am not sure what's true or false in this story. I take gossip, tea, rumor, and scandal from yesteryear, from online, from word of mouth, from books, and I ball it up and I tell you guys a story. Now, let's get to it.
Says So Squad and Scandalites, what's up, what it do? This is Ashley with Ashley Says So, and I am back with another old Hollywood scandals video. And if anybody would like to support me or my channel, the Amazon wish list is in the description along with the Cash App and the Venmo. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about actor Paul Reubens, aka Wee Herman, and why one moment he was so mega huge, face plastered everywhere, and then the next moment couldn't find the man nowhere. And honey, you already know it's a scandalous thing, child. So come on, let's get to it. Paul Rubenfield, aka Paul Reubens, aka Wee Herman, was born on August the 27th, 1952 in Peekskill, New York. His mother's name was Judy and his father's name was Milton, and on top of Paul, the Rubenfields had 2 more children. Out of all of their children though, Paul was the one with the most personality. He loved the idea of performing in front of crowds, and allegedly this love stemmed from him visiting the Ringling Brothers circuit. Now, by age 5, Paul started to add a comedic edge to his performances. He also wanted to perform his jokes in front of his family, so he got his parents to build him a makeshift stage. And every night he would tell them his best joke, or sometimes he would just put on full-on skits and plays. His parents actually thought this whole acting thing was just child's play, but as time passed, it was clear that it was definitely not just some childhood fancy. In fact, Paul started to cultivate his talent by jumping on any stage at any time. And by the time he was in high school, he was the president of the National Thespian Society. And after high school, he went even further with his thespian education at the California Institute for the Arts. Now, although Paul was in college, that didn't mean that he wanted to stay in and complete college. As a matter of fact, when he got to California, he immediately tried to break into the acting business. He started seeking out agents, managers, other actors, people that worked in the studios who had some pull. But while this has worked for some people we've covered on our list, unfortunately, Paul was not one of the lucky ones who just moved to Hollywood and just kind of shot off to fame. He was going to have to study, practice, and work to become a star. And so that's what he started to do. He continued his college classes, but he also started to perform in small local comedy clubs. And although he wasn't good enough to just shoot off to stardom at the start of his career, he was good at these local comedy clubs. He started to make a name for himself. When it was noticed that Paul Reubens had the ability to draw a crowd, other comedians started to want him to join their show or appear on their show. And that is how he appeared on The Gong Show. And even better than that, he ended up joining an improv group that a bunch of comedians have hailed from, called The Groundlings. And gossip claims that soon after he joined The Groundlings, maybe around 1977, he introduced a character known as Wee Herman. And notice I said introduced, not created, because gossip claims that the character Wee Herman was actually created by Paul Reubens way before he got with the Groundlings. But we'll talk about that when we start to get to the scandalous tales. So anyway, the Wee Herman character that Paul Reubens first introduced to the Groundlings was not the Wee Herman character that we all know today. Wee Herman was basically just a regular guy with a weird voice who wanted to make it as a comedian, but he told awful jokes. That was the character. So this Wee Herman guy would walk on stage in front of the crowd, talk about how he's gonna make it in Hollywood, and he would tell these jokes, and the gag was the audience knew that these jokes were terrible, and this guy was never gonna make it in Hollywood. So that is the first public version of Wee Herman. Well, in the next 5 years, the Wee Herman character morphed into a weird but hilarious, to some people, a hilarious character who wore this gray suit, which was a little bit too little, and this red bow tie. And now his voice was not only terrible, but he also incorporated this terrible laugh. Well, this version right here of Wee Herman started to get more and more popular. And so Paul Reubens sought to expand his career by bringing himself, Paul Reubens, and his Pee-wee character and appearing on Saturday Night Live. But unfortunately, when he auditioned, there was another performer there who auditioned, and his talent was very similar, almost mirrored Paul Reubens' talent. They both had these weird nasally voices, these crazy facial expressions. They were both obnoxious with their personalities, and Saturday Night Live ended up going with the other performer over Paul Reubens, and that other performer was Gilbert Gottfried. Well, this ticked Paul Reubens absolutely off. He thought he was a better performer than Gilbert Gottfried. As a matter of fact, he didn't understand what Gilbert Gottfried even brought to the table. In his mind, the bosses at Saturday Night Live were basically just stupid, or they didn't like him for whatever reason. So he vowed that if he couldn't kick down the original door to show business, he would create his own door and kick it down. And that's exactly what this man did. Paul Reubens started to borrow money from everybody he knew. What he wanted to do was start his own show for his character, Wee Herman. And that's what he did. He opened up at the Roxy Theater, and the show was called The Wee Herman Show. And the show just took off running. I mean, it was a sold out show for 5 months in a row. And let's remember, this is not the Wee Herman that we all know. Again, when he started this show, this was the adult version of Wee Herman. However, to make as much money as he possibly could while he was running his show, he ended up adding a matinee show, and this show was for children. And baby, if he thought the original Wee Herman was successful, a child, that thing couldn't compete with how successful these matinee shows were for the child's version of Wee Herman. And I don't know which version of Wee Herman that Paul Reubens preferred, but it was that child's version that just plain old reigned supreme. It wasn't long before the studio heads heard about this Wee Herman, and they offered to make a movie with Paul Reubens based around his Wee Herman character. That movie came out in 1985, and it was called Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and it was highly successful. So successful that immediately Paul Reubens was offered a contract to start his own children's show called Pee-wee's Playhouse. And when this show came out, Wee Herman shot into the stratosphere. There was Pee-wee toys, Pee-wee outfits, Pee-wee shoes. I mean, just all things Pee-wee. Wee Herman was an absolute superstar. But notice, I said Wee Herman was a superstar, not Paul Reubens. A lot of people didn't even know who the heck Paul Reubens was. And this right here is alleged to be the issue that started everything coming apart from the scene. It was the reason that Wee Herman's face went from everywhere to nowhere, pretty much all at the same time. And child, let me tell y'all how it happened. The scandal, child. The scandal. Let's get to it. So by 1990, Pee-wee's Playhouse had been on for 4 years, and it was still an absolute huge success. CBS came to Paul Reubens trying to renew Pee-wee's Playhouse for yet another season, and Paul Reubens tells them no. CBS is like, what? Baby, I know you lying. The way us and you are making money hand over foot? Paul Reubens says, nope, I'm not lying. I don't want to do another season. As a matter of fact, I want to take a sabbatical. I want to take a break. And CBS is like, well, okay. I mean, they have no choice but to agree with his demand. But this is definitely news to CBS. And not only is it news to CBS, it is news to pretty much everybody around Paul Reubens. Because as far back as they could remember, Paul Reubens had been pushing for Pee-wee to become this global icon. I mean, anytime he went out in public, he was dressed as Wee Herman. He barely even answered to his own name, Paul Reubens. Anytime he did interviews, he did them as Wee Herman. When somebody asked about his parents, this crazy fool said,
"Oh, Honey Herman and Herman Herman are doing just fine."
What? Boy, these folks is asking about your real parents. They ain't asking about Wee Herman's parents. But that's just how much he tried to make this Pee-wee thing real, a huge success. Well, allegedly, sometime during the 1990 year, Paul Reubens ended up having some sort of breakdown. There were many things involved, but the key issue was that when he came to Hollywood, or when he started his career, he did it to make himself famous. He wanted to be a famous actor or a famous comedian. He wanted people to look at him the way they looked at Robin Williams or the way they looked at Jerry Seinfeld. When Robin Williams walked down the street, somebody would point and say, "Hey, there goes Robin Williams." Everybody screamed. When Paul Reubens walks down the street, somebody points and says, "Hey, there goes Paul Reubens." Ain't nobody said a word. But if they yell Pee Wee Herman, everybody gonna come running. So again, this is said to be the root of the problem of the alleged breakdown in the year 1990. And this is the year that Paul decides to put away all things Pee Wee. Now, if he went out in public, he dressed as himself. If somebody wanted an interview, they would do it with Paul Reubens or they wouldn't do it at all. Gossip claims that he barely even wanted to bring up Pee Wee Herman's name anymore, except on the show. And then, of course, in November 1990, like I told you, he tells them that he doesn't want to do the Pee Wee Herman show anymore. He wants a break. So 1991 comes around and Paul Reubens has been living and acting as himself, and things apparently are not going the way he wants them to. Nobody is interested in the actor Paul Reubens. Pee Wee Herman still dominates all conversation. And gossip claims this was one of many things that led to him doing what he did in July of 1991. That is when Paul Reubens went to an adult movie theater in Sarasota, Florida, sat down to watch his movie, and started slapping, beating, and waxing that thing like it wasn't no tomorrow. Baby, the folks say that Paul Reubens just went to squishy town, honey. And although this was an adult movie theater, this behavior was not allowed, which to me is kind of stupid when you think about it. I mean, why else would anybody go to an adult movie theater? Well, anyways, whether I think it was stupid or not, it wasn't allowed and it also was illegal. And Paul just so happened to be spotted by a police officer while he was waxing away. And if it seems weird that a police officer just so happened to be there while this guy is sitting in a dark theater doing his thing, I'll explain that in just a minute. But to finish this story, after Paul Reubens was caught, he and 3 other guys were walking out of the movie theater when they were detained by the officer. Paul pulls the officer aside and allegedly says this.
I'm Pee Wee Herman. Don't you have kids? How about I just perform at one of your children's parties and we can just let this whole thing go?
The police officer told Paul to shut on up and he wasn't interested and took his behind on downtown. Well, the next day, a local reporter sees Paul Reubens' name in the arrest paper. He prints it in the local newspaper. Immediately, it is picked up by national media, and Paul Reubens' picture, where he looking like a white vampire in Brooklyn, is plastered everywhere. This case right here was one of the first of its kind, so it absolutely went down as basically a career ender. And a lot of people feel like Paul Reubens got railroaded. But what y'all don't know, and what I didn't know at first, is that allegedly Paul Reubens wanted to get railroaded. Baby, the folks say that Paul Reubens pretty much planned out the whole thing. The way the story goes, Paul Reubens told some of his closest friends that he was just absolutely fed up with Pee Wee Herman. He said that he hated that he ever even created the character because he felt like he could never be the actor that he wanted to be with his own name. And allegedly, he was so fed up with the Pee Wee Herman character that he wanted to kill it and bury it. Why do you think he got caught doing something so incredibly opposite from Pee Wee and Pee Wee's personality? So incredibly opposite from someone who would appeal to children. Why would he choose to do something like that? He could have done anything. He could have got busted with drugs, could have bust somebody's head to the white meat, could have even robbed somebody. But gossip claims that he didn't want to do a crime that would have victims, so he didn't want to hurt anybody. But he did want to do a crime that would impact his Pee Wee Herman character so much that it basically would just wipe the character off the map. And y'all, all of this is just rumor, as you guys all know, but if we look at the evidence, it kind of makes it ring as true. For one, allegedly, Paul Reubens knew that theater like the back of his hand because gossip claims that in 1971, so 20 years before, he got busted for loitering and prowling around that same adult theater. And another thing about that theater, allegedly, it was a famous undercover cop hangout. Rumor has it that every other week, undercover cops would hang out at that theater to bust people for perversion or indecent exposure. Allegedly, all of the local people knew this. Paul wasn't necessarily a local, but gossip claims that he had family living in Sarasota, Florida. So he was there enough. Like I said, he was just there in 1971, 20 years before. So all signs point to him knowing that this movie theater was crawling with cops at any given time. But still, knowing this, he decided to just out of nowhere pull out his jewels and start stroking them just for everybody to see. And not only that, to start doing it right when a cop walks by. It definitely seems like he set himself up to get caught. If he did indeed set himself up, I do not think that he knew that he was going to get the backlash that he got. Like I told you before, I mean, it was all over the newspapers, magazines, TVs. All of the talk show hosts were clowning him. Parents were in an uproar. And worst of all, they started to remove Pee Wee Herman toy products from the shelves. Now, that is the thing that I don't think he accounted for. Because, child, he might have wanted the doggone Pee Wee character to be dead and disappear, but not the Pee Wee toys, child. He was making bank from that. He was getting a lot of residual income from them doggone toys. So when those got pulled off the shelf, I think that's when he kind of was like, yee. But he never came out to do any interviews to defend himself. As a matter of fact, he kind of did the total opposite. He just kind of moved back behind the shadows. He did make an appearance as Pee Wee Herman at the 1991 MTV Award, and that was kind of heartwarming because he did receive a standing ovation. So it did show that he still had some supporters out there. But if Paul Reubens had set out to destroy Pee Wee Herman, if he truly did, effectively, he did what he set out to do. Pee Wee Herman was pretty much obliterated. Paul Reubens retreated to the shadows, like I said before. Gossip claims that he did contemplate suicide many times. However, starting 1993, 1994, I think he started to appear on TV shows just sporadically, very spotty-like, but as Paul Reubens. And then on 2001, he got a big break as Paul Reubens. And that is when he was offered a role on the movie Blow. Paul Reubens did an excellent job playing a character that was nothing like Pee Wee Herman, and it looked like he was about to revamp his career and possibly come back very strong. But in 2002, everything came to a screeching halt again. And that was because Paul Reubens was allegedly caught with children porno movie. And yes, I said porno instead of the other word. I hope you guys can figure out what I'm saying. Once you guys figure it out, you may be like, what? Oh yeah, baby. This was one of the big things that not many people knew about. Honey, listen to this. The folks say that the police had just busted actor Jeffrey Jones for child porn, and either Jeffrey or somebody involved in the scandal with him snitched like a mother sucker on Paul. Baby, them folks say that person, whoever it was, sat right down at that police station and said, well, Paul Reubens doing it too. And that's all the police needed to hear. Baby, Paul Reubens was on a movie set when he got a phone call that the police were at his house right now rummaging through every possession that he had. Paul Reubens raced home on 2 wheels. Soon as he got there, police chief said, cuff him. And they did. Now, according to police, they found over 70,000 items of things that could be memorabilia, but were also intertwined with porn. And even more than that, child porn. But let's talk for a second, because the word on these old Hollywood scandalous streets is that the videos and photos that the police found were considered vintage porn. And as far as the child porn, what it really was vintage photos of teenage boys that had no clothes on. And when I say vintage, I'm saying some of the photos and videos ranged from as late as the 1960s to as early as the late 1800s, early 1900s. So since this stuff was considered vintage, and the way some of the teen boys were posing in some of the photos, it looked more like art instead of vulgar. So since this was the case, Paul Reubens and his lawyers basically said that that's what this was. They said that this was art. They said that Paul Reubens was a vintage porn collector. That is something that he was interested in. Yes, some of the people featured may have been underage, but it had nothing to do with actual feelings and everything to do with art. Apparently, Paul's lawyers argued the collector's items avenue very effectively because Paul's child porn charges were dropped and instead he pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor, which was an obscenity charge. However, for the next 3 years, he was required to register his address with the sheriff's office, and he also could not be around minors without their parents' or legal guardians' permission. Now check me out. It may be a little bit of scandalous add-on to this, a little bit more tea drop, because according to a gossip blog, this side of Paul Reubens was actually the personality of the very first original Pee Wee Herman character. Gossip claims that before Paul Reubens even got with the Groundling, he had created a character named Pee Wee Herman, and this character used to wear mirrors on his shoes, and allegedly he used to tell jokes and stories about babysitting children while playing with dolls while he was telling the joke. Again, that information is from a gossip blog. Could be a lie, probably is a lie. But it's definitely out there circulating around the internet that was the original Pee Wee Herman. This Pee Wee Herman was not introduced to the public. In fact, gossip claims that this Pee Wee Herman only performed in front of Paul's close friend. What I do know that is definitely the truth, though, is that after this 2002 arrest, Paul Reubens' career was actually not destroyed. Because first of all, nobody really knew about the 2002 arrest for child porn because it was pushed down to a misdemeanor and then effectively swept up under the rug. And then second of all, nobody really even knew who Paul Reubens was, so it was a curse that nobody knew his name, but it also was a blessing. So therefore, when this scandal came out, he just wasn't a big enough star for anybody to really care enough to cancel him. Since he wasn't canceled though, he was able to continue working. And as far as his dating life, gossip claims that he only dated one woman, at least publicly. That was actress Debbie Mazar or Debbie Mazar. And after her, gossip claims that he never dated anybody else publicly, but privately he did date again. However, these were male. And yes, that leads to the next rumor that Paul Reubens was actually a homosexual man, which leads me to tell you also that later on in life, allegedly Paul Reubens admitted that the collecting prawn that he had, the vintage prawn, was actually homosexual prawn. Now, in the last years of Paul Reubens' life, gossip claims that there were talks to open up a museum with all of his Pee Wee Herman items, memorabilia, outfits, all of that good stuff. But unfortunately, it never came to pass because on July 30th, 2023, Paul Reubens ended up passing away with cancer. And he'd actually been diagnosed 6 years before, but he never told anyone. In fact, he got his friends to release a statement shortly after he died, basically apologizing to the public and his fans that he did not tell them about his cancer diagnosis. So this was the old Hollywood scandalous tale of Mr. Paul Reubens. Whether you love him, whether you hate him, one thing is for certain, he made his mark on the world with his character Pee Wee Herman. If you guys like the video, please like the video. If you guys have not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. And if you guys are interested in me talking about life, current news, events, celebrities, whatever really just crosses this big head of mine, you guys can go subscribe to my second channel, which is called Says So Talk. And if you got church ears that can't hear nothing bad, then baby, don't go over there because we're going to be talking some real deal Holyfield. Anyways, guys, I'm done cutting up. I love you guys so much. I will be back soon with a video on both channels. Bye.